You know, sometimes the greatest goodbyes arrive in the most silent of moments. That morning, the opulent lobby of the Whitmore Hotel was altered. Still sleek, still refined, but with a silence of reverence suspended in the air. Miss Tanaka, the woman who had once remained unseen behind the front desk, now stood with every gaze in the building upon her. Employees, lined up, tidy and humble, bowing slowly as she moved through their ranks. Even the manager, stern and haughty days before, bent his head and attempted to utter "arigatou gozaimasu" in respectful, measured syllables. But it was Martha she came to last. Her steps slowed, gentler somehow. From her fragile handbag, Miss Tanaka extracted a velvet case and closed her hand about Martha's, the gentle pressure pushing the case into her palm. Within was a silver crane pin, glittering and serene, Kyoto hand-forged. Her own voice, steady and soft, contained so much thankfulness in so few words. "For your kindness, you reminded me I'm not alone." For a moment they said nothing, just two women of two worlds, bound by silent understanding. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, Miss Tanaka turned and departed through those glass doors, into the morning light, leaving behind something worth infinitely more than gold. A maid who spoke from her heart, and a millionaire who heard. What came next changed more than one life. A few weeks later, a plain letter showed up in the hotel. No hype flourish, no headlines, just a note from Miss Tanaka and a contribution in Martha's name. It was enough to spark language classes around Charleston, beginning with the very hotel where they first met. The attached message: "When people speak from the heart, we all understand." That line stuck, not because it was lyrical, but because it was true. In a world full of noise, judgment, and hustle, this was a reminder that real connection doesn't require perfect grammar, smooth accents, or big titles. It just requires kindness and the courage to see people, not just serve them. That brief moment between Martha and Miss Tanaka didn't just change a guest experience. It quietly altered a whole hotel's mindset, and perhaps, if you think about it, it might just alter the way we view strangers too. So the next time someone doesn't speak your language, don't back away, move forward, because understanding often begins with listening. She strolled in as if she owned the hotel, but nobody had a clue who she was. And worse, nobody could hear her. At the crack of a cool autumn morning in Charleston, South Carolina, when the city teemed with tourists and the sun painted the historic buildings with gentle gold, the five-star Whitmore Grand Hotel towered high on its marble floors, shining, and bellboys queued up like soldiers in formation. At precisely 9:17 a.m., the lobby doors creaked open, and in came a long, elegant woman, black designer coat, dark, sleek hair pulled back behind her ears, a soft leather bag clutched in one hand. Her name was Miss Yuki Tanaka, and although no one was aware of it yet, she was one of Japan's most low-key and influential hotel operators, a millionaire dozens of times over. She smiled graciously at the reception desk as the young receptionist greeted her. But when she responded, it wasn't English, it was gentle, smooth Japanese. The receptionist gasped, shocked. Ma'am, do you speak English?" She merely smiled and shook her head. In a matter of minutes, bewilderment reigned. More employees came. The manager attempted to speak slowly in English. Then someone attempted Spanish, even French. But Miss Tanaka simply stood silently, her bearing brimming with patience and dignity, answering only in Japanese. She wasn't being rude, simply calm, collected, and completely alone in a world that didn't know how to greet her halfway. A millionaire in plain sight, but to all of them there she could have been invisible. During the course of the day, tales began floating around the hotel. "Must be famous," someone breathed. "Did you see her jewelry?" Another questioned. Guests and staff began to speculate, some assuming she was an actress, others that she was royalty. But the reality was, nobody knew for sure. She spoke in written notes, delivering them with a bow, but even her handwriting was difficult for the American staff to read. Her room service went unrequested, her questions went unanswered, and yet she never grumbled, just bowed, smiled sweetly, and waited. Now, down a quiet hall off the staff quarters, wheeling a cart of clean towels, was Martha Green, a 57-year-old housekeeping supervisor, with gentle eyes, calloused hands, and a low-key method of work that endeared her to staff and made her invisible to most guests. Martha was no ordinary maid. She had lived in Okinawa, Japan for almost 10 years when her late husband was stationed with the Marines. She taught on base and studied Japanese, not only to survive, but to actually learn it. She hadn't spoken it in years, but when she passed Miss Tanaka by the elevator and heard her whispered request for assistance, though everyone else was oblivious, it all flooded back to her. Martha drew near slowly and spoke softly in proper Japanese. Sumimasen, izukashi desu. Excuse me, are you having trouble? Miss Tanaka stood stock still, her eyes wide, and then they welled up with tears. It had been 2 days since anyone had said a word in her language. In a hotel full of sounds, the one who finally heard was from the most unlikely source. From then on, Miss Tanaka asked for Martha personally each morning. She wasn't pushy, just desperate to have one person she could converse with. They sat together in the garden of the hotel after her work, sipping green tea and exchanging gentle conversation. Miss Tanaka had actually traveled to Charleston, not for business, but for healing. She had lost her only son recently. Her husband had died a few years prior. With no one else remaining, she traveled to America seeking a vague recollection. Her father had spent some time at Charleston when he was a young man. She wanted to discover a tie. Some point he may have walked, some picture he may have stood in front. But what she found was bewilderment, loneliness, and walls constructed from language. And then, Martha asked few questions. She simply listened. Sometimes that is enough for people. And in that silence, two very different women from opposite sides of the globe found a sense of comfort in each other. She had sought memories, but what she discovered was something much more human. A few days hence, Miss Tanaka asked to see the manager of the hotel. As interpreted by Martha, she complimented the staff, but issued a humble plea: give more notice to the listeners, even when they're not supposed to. As she was leaving, she took Martha aside and gave her a small black velvet box. What she found inside was a silver pin in the shape of a crane, a Japanese symbol of healing, peace, and good luck. You reminded me I'm not invisible, she said quietly, placing the pin in Martha's hand. You saw me when no one else did. The next morning, she left without a big goodbye, just a soft bow at the front desk and a handwritten card left at the counter saying thank you. But what came next surprised everyone. A week afterward, the hotel was sent a letter from Tokyo by a law firm. Miss Yuki Tanaka had donated in Martha's name a bountiful donation to sponsor language and cultural instruction for hotel staff in Charleston. The note contained only one sentence: one kind voice can change an entire experience. It took only one maid to make an impact throughout a whole city. These days, Martha still pushes her cleaning cart through the halls, but now she wears the silver crane on her collar undefined, and whenever a new guest arrives, she's the first to offer a warm smile and say, in a voice filled with grace, welcome, undefined, I'm happy to help. Because sometimes the most powerful conversations don't need many words, they just need someone willing to listen. Now the thing about the Whitmore Grand Hotel is this: it was no ordinary hotel. It was all about perfection, from the sharp uniforms to the gleaming brass hardware and precisely folded napkins. Every detail was always exactly where it should be. The staff was privy to all the guests' preferences, even before they walked in, what they drank, breakfast time, even if they preferred feather pillows or firm. But that morning, something was different. A guest had arrived who defied all expectation. She was elegant, soft-spoken, enigmatic. Miss Yuki Tanaka spoke little, but the little she did say was in Japanese. None of the staff at the front desk could understand her, not even the manager. So by noon, the quiet that had fallen around her had grown to be the noisiest sound in the building. Employees were whispering in corners, peeking at her between carts and counters. Did you see her necklace? One waitress whispered to another. I heard that she came here on a private plane. A bellhop contributed. No, another joined in. She has hotels in Tokyo. That's what I heard. These were not rumors. They were hypotheses, attempting to occupy the space where comprehension should have lain. The more that she was an enigma, the more people supplied the gaps with outlandish assumptions. When individuals don't know someone, they tend to invent stories, but it was not so. Miss Tanaka had listed her requirements on dainty ivory paper. Her writing was stunning, sweeping like brushstrokes from a painter's brush. but to most of the hotel staff, it could just as well have been artwork rather than orders. Some considered her bossy, others considered her reserved, but in truth, she was simply attempting to be heard, and with each time she turned in another note, and received in response confused looks and soft regrets, the gap between her and the people around her widened a little bit more. The hotel manager, who was otherwise cool and collected, began to pace behind the reception desk. He summoned a concierge from the other shift. Perhaps anyone might have some knowledge of Japanese, but nothing. Phones buzzed, apps didn't translate, and even the kindest gestures didn't translate. Everyone was eager to assist, but no one was sure how, and yet despite it all, Miss Tanaka was still gentle. She smiled gently, bowed upon address, and stood quietly, even when the personnel stumbled. She didn't shout or complain, but for a moment there was something in her eyes that was exhausted, not tired, exactly, but drained, as if she had been misinterpreted one time too many. It wasn't the words she couldn't comprehend, it was her. Meanwhile, all this confusion went on at the front of the hotel. Something very different was developing in a much less busy hallway, one just past the double doors that led to housekeeping. That's where Martha Green walked purposefully, coasting her cart along the tile floor, singing a hymn to herself. Martha wasn't new here. She'd worked at the Whitmore Grand for more than 2 decades. She'd memorized every room, every squeaking door hinge, every flaw in the heating system. But more than all of that, she saw things, not with her eyes precisely, but with her heart. She paid details that others overlooked. She'd once assisted a mourning widow in locating a missing ring hidden in a bedpost. Another time she saw a lone traveler who merely wanted someone to listen, and sat with her on her break. That was simply Martha. She saw the detail. That afternoon, she was restocking the soaps by the elevator on the 5th floor, when she saw Miss Tanaka pressing a luggage tag between her fingers, as if trying to smooth out the wrinkles. The woman's exterior seemed composed, but something in her movements, small, quiet, showed uncertainty. Martha didn't hesitate. She walked over with her usual elegance and said, "Need some help, ma'am?" But as she walked up and observed the woman's eyes, something clicked. The features, the tone, the stance, and then as a memory she hadn't visited in a long time, the language came back. In a voice that was both gentle and firm, Martha spoke in crisp Japanese. "Some, Mimisen, Nanika Tetsu, de Mashu." And then as the sun seeping through morning mist, her face brightened, not with happiness per se, but with something gentler, relief. Amidst a hotel full of chiseled suits and grand titles, it was the demure maid who understood her. They exchanged little more than a sentence or two, but in that instant, broke open the wall, closing in on Miss Tanaka. Throughout the day, she returned later that night, with her fresh towels. The following morning, she was asked to tea. Day by day, their connection developed. They didn't exchange words perpetually, but whenever they spoke, it was warmly and naturally, as old friends reunited after many years away from each other. Martha found out that Miss Tanaka was not in Charleston on business. She was here pursuing a phantom of a memory. Her recently deceased father, who had been a young student in America years ago, had studied in this same town before coming back to Japan. Having just lost her only son, and already a widow for years, Miss Tanaka yearned to be close to her father once more, to walk where he walked, to breathe where an atmosphere might still reverberate with his history. But what she discovered was silence. Sweet smiles, yes. Courteous service, certainly, but no one who really knew. No one, until Martha. She traveled an ocean for connection, and discovered it within the heart of someone no one had seen. And so, amidst the rest of the hotel, humming with rumors and speculations regarding the mystery woman in the suite on the floor above, the actual story was being played out in hushed corners, gentle whispers, and shared tea between two women from two different worlds, yet united by something that required no translation: empathy. Let's take a moment and introduce the woman nobody thought would count in this tale, but who was everything. Her name was Martha Green. She was 57, and she had held more jobs than most could keep track of, but the one job she hung on to and cherished was housekeeping supervisor at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Each day, like a clockwork, she arrived in her ironed uniform, cart filled with fresh towels, rows of mini shampoos standing at attention like tiny soldiers, singing soft gospel hymns to herself. As she made her way through the corridors, her colleagues loved her. Even the rambunctious newbies looked up to her, and the visitors, well, they didn't even see her. But Martha never let that faze her. She'd constructed her existence on discreet steadiness, on the ability to execute minor actions with precision, on observing what others did not. She wasn't flashy, didn't seek the limelight, but she had the sort of fortitude that arises from enduring tempests, with poise. Now, if you glanced at Martha, you'd most likely never suppose that she could get by in Japanese. But life has its curveballs. Decades before, she had lived close to 8 years in Okinawa, Japan, with her deceased husband, a Marine stationed there. When he was working on base, Martha took up a job at a local school assisting children with English. Along the way, she did not only learn the language, she learned the culture, the customs, the manners. She was taught to bow with respect, to speak with tact, how silence spoke louder than words. And though it had been years since she'd departed, some things remain when they form your heart. At times the last person you would think of is the one holding the story no one's aware of. That afternoon, Martha was cleaning the corridor around the elevators. Nothing unusual, just another ordinary pass. But when she glanced up, she noticed something that caught her attention. There was Miss Yuki Tanaka, standing silently by the luggage cart, with a little tag in her fingers. She could tell she was attempting to decipher something, or understand it, but her brow was knitted, her fingers fluttering ever so slightly, like a person attempting to remain calm while not knowing. It wasn't obnoxious, it wasn't flamboyant, but to Martha, who saw everything, it was a silent scream for assistance. She didn't hesitate, didn't question herself. She just shut off the vacuum, crept forward slowly, and with a warm, soothing tone, uttered the words she hadn't used in years. Sumimasen, osakashi desho. Excuse me, are you having trouble? The response was immediate. Miss Tanaka raised her head, blinking first in surprise, but then her expression relaxed, eyes opening not in fright, but in utter absolute relief. You could practically hear the breath she'd been holding for days finally let out. She nodded, almost hesitantly, and then spoke in Japanese, her voice barely above a whisper. Wakarimasaka, you understand me? Martha smiled softly, cocked her head, and answered, Hi, Dejubu desu. Yes, it's okay. And in that instant, standing there by a luggage cart and a vacuum cord, something changed, not only between two women, but throughout the whole rhythm of the story. Amidst a world full of individuals who looked straight through her, she discovered one woman who actually saw her. After that day, Miss Tanaka requested Martha by name, not out of vanity or sense of entitlement, but because she simply required someone whom she could converse with, someone who didn't make her feel like a foreigner. Martha carried her new towels, but also carried with her her comfort, and gradually, Miss Tanaka started to let down her guard. They began sharing tea in the garden at the end of Martha's workday, little talks to begin with, weather, flowers, the serene courtyard. But later, the talk became more profound. Miss Tanaka told her tale, not the theatrics of it all, but with the low sadness of a woman who had borne too much alone. She had traveled to Charleston, not for commerce, not for extravagance, but in pursuit of a memory. Her father, who was long deceased now, had attended in the U.S. When he was a young man, she'd discovered an old photograph of him at a university outside the hotel, standing in front of a live oak tree. Having lost her sole son recently, and already a widow, she traveled here in hopes of standing where her father had stood, to feel near to someone, to something. But what she got was cold smiles, bewildered looks, and inscrutable movements, until someone finally listened to her, not as a problem or a puzzle, but as a person. She traveled oceans, in pursuit of a memory, and discovered a connection she didn't even know she was searching for. Martha didn't interrupt, didn't ask 1,000 questions. She just listened, and in a world full of people eager to share, being heard was a precious thing. They used Japanese for the most part, but Martha would occasionally switch to English when explaining a menu item or an offer at a hotel. She volunteered to tour with Miss Tanaka through the historic district,
even guiding her to a local university archive, where she might uncover more of her father's history. Miss Tanaka turned down the outing, though not because she didn't enjoy it. She was happy. For the first time during her trip, she had discovered what she was truly searching for: someone who understood not only her words, but her silence, someone who didn't view her as a puzzle to be solved, but as a woman mere trying to feel seen. In a luxury hotel, brimming with service, one tiny moment of humanity turned into the greatest gesture of all. Their last tea together was subdued, no grand goodbye, a smile, a gentle arigato, in Japanese, and a little velvet box, pressed into Martha's palm by Miss Tanaka, before she departed, and within it, a silver crane pin, graceful, light, and heavy with significance. The crane, in Japanese culture, is a sign of healing, longevity, and peace. Miss Tanaka put it in Martha's hand, and spoke softly. "You gave me something I didn't know I was missing." And with that, she took a deep bow, not the perfunctory nod most visitors offer, but a full, respectful one that spoke louder than any words ever could. Martha, moved beyond words, bowed back. She pinned it to her collar the next day, and the day after, undefined, not to brag about it, but to remember, because occasionally, the most simple act of kindness leaves the greatest impression, and sometimes, the ones we take for granted are the ones who turn everything around. As soon as Martha uttered those initial words in Japanese, something in the hotel softly changed, like a door that had long remained locked now creaked open. Miss Yuki Tanaka never asked for anything fancy afterward. She didn't request upgrades or special treatment. All she desired, every morning, was Martha. At about 8 a.m. each morning, Miss Tanaka would stand beside the elevator on the 5th floor, herself composed to perfection, waiting for Martha's cart to turn the corner. And when it came, she would smile, not the distant, polite smile she reserved for the front desk, but a cheerful, near-relieved smile, as if greeting a friendly face in a country still half strange. They didn't talk loudly, they didn't raise a fuss. They would quietly talk in the garden, or have tea in the lounge of the hotel, before Martha's shift would end. Sometimes, they would just sit, with nothing said, and yet, amidst that quiet, something profound was taking place. Staff started to pay attention. The enigmatic lady from Japan, who had appeared like an unsolvable riddle, now would laugh softly when Martha was present, not loudly, but freely, with that sort of soft, genuine pleasure that is impossible to simulate. A couple of the staff members would whisper about it. One server said, "It's like she turns into a different person when she's with her." Another added, "I've never seen her so relaxed." Even the manager stopped by once, curious but respectful, just to watch from a distance, as the two women shared a peaceful moment. Beneath the dogwood trees, in the courtyard, the guest they couldn't understand had finally found someone who didn't need words to hear her. One late afternoon, when the sun had dipped low over the Charleston skyline, and the hotel hummed softly, with last-minute check-ins, Miss Tanaka offered Martha a seat with her in the courtyard for tea. 2 dainty porcelain cups, a tiny pot of jasmine tea, and a bowl of sliced fruit sat ready on the table. Martha sat down tentatively, pushing a few crumbs off her apron, not sure at first whether she was supposed to, but Miss Tanaka nodded graciously, inviting her to. Something was different with her that day. Her eyes were serious, and when she spoke, there was a gentleness in her voice that came with only complete trust. In stumbling, but sincere Japanese, she started to she explained to Martha about her existence, about the hotel chain she had assisted in creating after marrying into a business family, about the long days, and even longer nights, managing properties throughout Tokyo, Osaka, and farther. Her voice wasn't bragging, it was resonant, because behind all the achievement was something quietly shattered. Miss Tanaka had lost her one son. Sudden illness, no forewarning, just that. Her husband had died years ago, leaving her to care for their son and run the business on her own. She did it admirably on paper anyway. Her hotels were prospering, her employees looked up to her, but to her own self, she was a ghost, walking through glass corridors. She had traveled to Charleston, not for commerce, but for something far more intimate. Her father, dead a long time ago, had once attended here. In America, there was an old picture stuffed into her wallet. Her father in front of a big oak tree, with Spanish moss hanging from it. A tiny university plaque, barely visible in the right-hand corner of the photo. She hoped to walk the same streets, breathe the same air, perhaps even catch a whiff of him. But what she discovered in its place was silence. Couldn't get directions, couldn't read signs, couldn't tell the world why she had tears streaming down her face. In a public garden alone, people smiled and nodded, but no one noticed her, until Martha. She didn't need guidance getting around the city. She needed guidance, feeling human again. As Miss Tanaka completed her words, her hands shook, ever so slightly, as she picked up the teacup. Martha sat, quietly, listening, with the patience of the well-injured. She didn't break in, didn't fill the silence with words that meant nothing. She merely reached across the table and put her hand over Miss Tanaka's. "You don't need English to be heard," Martha whispered. "You just need someone who is willing to listen." And in that moment, something occurred that words cannot truly explain. Two women, from differing sides of the earth, one mourning a son, finding another too soon, a widow, served in tandem, in the warm light of an afternoon, in the South, tied not by words, but by silent knowledge. Martha did not attempt to repair. She made no guarantees that it would be different, or spun tales to take her mind away. She simply sat, holding space for someone else's reality, and that was sufficient. It wasn't a matter of language, it was a matter of being understood, and someone finally was. They only grew closer. After that, Miss Tanaka resumed her reserved routines, still aloof to most of the staff, but wide open with Martha. She started taking short strolls again, this time with a bit more confidence. She went to the campus of a local college, her father's photo in hand, and even came across a small library that still retained records from the year he was there. She followed in his footsteps, as well as she could, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by Martha. But even when alone, she was no longer alone, for now someone in this city knew her. She had a face to return to at the end of the day, a voice that welcomed her in her own language, a friend, and that made all the difference. The rest of the hotel continued on. Guests came and went. Breakfast was served. Sheets were laundered. But below the surface, something truly special had transpired. A stranger, who had come as an enigma, shrouded in quiet and distance, had turned into something much stronger, a breathing reminder of what it is to be connected, when we decide to listen, rather than presume, when we take our time, and just care. At a 5-star hotel full of opulence, the greatest service provided was comprehension. That evening, as Martha returned to her small apartment, over the hotel garage, she looked down at her uniform, and smiled. The silver crane pin Miss Tanaka had given her just a few days before, still glinted against her chest. It wasn't gold, it wasn't flashy, but it was worth more than anything she'd ever received, and somehow she felt this tale was just getting started. The next morning, something unusual occurred at the hotel, something that caught even the veteran staff off guard. Miss Tanaka was leaving, and rather than the usual discreet goodbyes, the whole front desk waited in line to bid her farewell. From bellhops to concierge, they lined up side by side, doing their best to say, "Arija, do gozaimasu," each and every word said with reverence and a little nervous pride. They bowed, some nodded graciously, others touched a hand to their chest, in respect. Miss Tanaka, as elegant as always, took every goodbye with a gracious smile, but when she looked at Martha, at the back of the line, all else dissolved into the background. No great speech, no soaring music, just two women standing unobtrusively in the middle of a crowded hotel lobby, suspended in a moment that felt quiet and holy. From her handbag, Miss Tanaka produced something enveloped in soft velvety material, a little box, not large enough to hold even in the palm. She held it out to Martha silently at first, then softly said, "For your goodness." In the box was a silver crane pin, small and exquisitely crafted, a symbol of peace and longevity in Japan. It had been handcrafted in Kyoto, and its wings curved upward, as if ready to take flight. "You reminded me I'm not alone," she added, her voice light, but sincere. Martha, holding the gift in her weathered hands, didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She had spent most of her life in the background, quiet, steady, unseen by most. But
in that instant, it was certain somebody had seen her, really seen her. One small act of kindness had rippled further than anybody could have conceived. Miss Tanaka didn't hang around after that. She bowed softly and smiled once more, then turned and proceeded through the revolving doors. No limousine, no glamour, just a gentle breeze carrying her out into the Charleston morning. Martha lingered there for a second, not budging, her fingers still sweeping against the rim of the velvet case. The lobby, which had been full of noise, had grown quiet in a show of respect. Something important had just occurred. Everyone knew it, even though they couldn't quite articulate it. Over the course of the next few days, life gradually returned to its routine. Guests checked in and out. The bedding continued to accumulate. The elevator ran its familiar hum, but something had shifted under the surface. International guests were met with more patience from staff members. A phrasebook was left in the break room. A receptionist began practicing Japanese greetings during lunch break. Martha held the crane pin near, folded neatly in a shadow box in her small apartment over the garage, with a picture of her deceased husband and a bit of Okinawan material she'd preserved from years ago. Time passed, hushed, tenderly, until the hotel manager summoned Martha into the office. A few weeks later, she entered, thinking it was a timing change or a housekeeping note, but the manager gave her a sealed envelope instead. No return address, only her name on the outside, in beautiful handwriting. In the envelope was a letter not addressed to her but to the hotel, from Miss Tanaka. There she clarified that she had donated in Martha's name money to pay for fundamental language lessons for all the hotel employees throughout the whole city of Charleston. It was not to get everyone fluent, she wrote, but to build bridges where silence previously existed. When people speak from the heart, read the note, we all understand. One woman's sorrow became a gift that would help others learn how to communicate. The manager glared at Martha, obviously shaken. She did this for you, he said softly. Martha squinted over tears and nodded her head slowly. No, she replied. She did it for us. We all worked. I just had the right thing to say. But inside, she knew it was never about the words. It never had been. It was about being there. It was about listening, about treating a stranger as a neighbor, even when the distance appeared too wide to bridge. That night, as the sun set low over the city, Martha sat on the rear steps of the hotel, a cup of chamomile tea in her hands. Warming them, she observed the sky go orange and purple, the same hues once coloring the skies above Okinawa. She considered how 1 minute a choice to say something, to show kindness in a back hallway, had altered the course of her whole month, perhaps even her life. She considered Miss Tanaka stalking those Charleston streets silently, mourning, bereft, trying to find something she couldn't quite define, and then discovering it in a woman with soft eyes and a soft voice, who used her language, not only with words but with comprehension. You never know when your soft kindness will be another person's tipping point. The silver crane pin remained with Martha from that day on. She wore it, not every day but frequently enough. When an arriving guest appeared bewildered, when a child was crying in the lobby, when someone from far, far away needed a little assistance just understanding how things worked, and each time someone inquired about it, she'd smile softly and state, "It's from a friend." She reminded me that we can still hear one another even in silence. And so the legacy endured, not in plaques or press releases, but in moment-to-moment living, exchanged glances, and open hearts. A maid, a visitor, a quiet exchange between two souls the world almost passed by, and a reminder to us all that sometimes the greatest connection doesn't come in the words we speak, but in the love we're willing to extend. One maid, one language, one act of kindness that shifted everything.